Today we're bringing the bread machine back out, but we're doing things a little bit differently and trying not only a box version of bread, but a gluten-free box version of bread. So let's see how this turns out. So I obviously love to do a lot of bread on this channel, but I've had a lot of people in my life who cannot have gluten. And so I thought it would be interesting to see how the bread machine handles a gluten-free bread. And I actually wanted to see if it could do a box bread. The one that I'm going to use is the Simple Mills Almond Flour Baking Mix Artisan Bread. I did actually put this into chat, the directions and what the ingredients were, to see what I needed to do differently and let it scour the internet. What chat said was best is to use the cake function, because with gluten-free options, you actually are wanting the vinegar and the baking soda to do the rise, not yeast. So the concern with a bread machine is that it actually will deflate the bread because you're mixing so much later. Also, you want to add the vinegar a little bit later in the process, so I'm going to set a timer and then add the vinegar as late as possible, as close to the cooking process, but still mixing. We still want it mixed in, we just want it to kind of be later in the process. Now, I'm obviously gonna test this by doing it the exact way that the box says to do it. We'll see if the bread machine comes close, is better, worse, who knows. This should be a fun video, so let's get started. I do wanna quickly point out that you can use this for flatbreads, dinner rolls. It also said that they do a lot of cookies and crackers, things like that, and it is the certified gluten-free. Since I want these to come out basically as close to the same time as possible, I went ahead and preheated my oven to 350 degrees Fahrenheit for the one that I'm going to mix by hand. And then for the bread machine, we're just gonna do it as normal. Okay, so for this part on the instructions, I'm actually gonna go ahead and whisk the eggs, water, and oil together before I pour it in the bread machine, just because I want to give this the best shot. So I added 1/4 cup of water, and now I'm going to do 2 tablespoons of olive oil. And I'm really hoping this bread works, because I've seen gluten-free breads in bread machines before, but there's so many ingredients and I just feel like that's so complicated. So I am gonna go ahead and whisk this together. Now we are just going to pour all those ingredients into the bottom. Okay, I'm going to add the baking mix to cover it as best I can. I don't know that this will totally matter since we're not using yeast. Into the bread machine. And then per chat, we're going to do the cake cycle, which is 10 on my machine. And then as soon as I start this, I'm going to set a timer to add the vinegar. Okay, so while this is mixing, I actually looked it up, and it is 24 minutes for the stirring cycle. So I set a 19-minute timer so that I would have the last 5 minutes for it to mix with the vinegar. I am gonna scrape down the sides, because I remember with banana bread with the cake function, I don't feel like the sides do as great. So I'm going to scrape those down just to make sure all that flour gets incorporated. For this next part, I wanted to have everything ready to go so that as soon as the dough was mixed, I could get it straight into the pan. So I crumbled up a piece of parchment paper and placed it in a loaf pan. And then I actually use a second loaf pan to press it down into a shape. I find that this helps the parchment paper fit in the pan really well and keeps everything nice and neat. Next, I gathered all my ingredients just like we did with the bread machine version, and I mixed together the 3 eggs, 1/4 cup of water, and 2 tablespoons of olive oil. Then I actually had to transfer everything into a large mixing bowl, and I added the bread mix. I did choose a glass bowl so that I could easily see the sides and make sure that everything was thoroughly combined. For the vinegar, I used apple cider vinegar. Since the instructions didn't specify a particular type, I went ahead and added the 2 tablespoons and mixed it well. After that, I let the dough sit for just a couple minutes to activate. Then the directions called for spooning the dough into the loaf pan rather than pouring it. I'm assuming that that helps preserve some of the air in the mixture and prevents it from deflating. Once it was in the pan, it went into the oven at 350 degrees for 1 hour. Okay, so this has about 5 more minutes, so I'm gonna add the vinegar. I'm also gonna go ahead and scrape down the sides one more time. give this the best chance we can. Bread is in the oven, bread is in the bread machine. They both have about an hour to cook. I do think the bread machine will finish a little bit later because it's a little bit longer process and it's still mixing, if you can hear. But they should come out roughly about the same time, and then I'll let them cool and we'll be back to taste test. Okay, so this just came out the oven. Quick test, it came out clean. So let this cool about 10 minutes. And then this has about 6 more minutes and I will let that cool as well. At this point, the bread had finished baking in the bread machine and you can actually see the paddle through the top of the loaf. It did seem to be sticking to the sides of the pan a little bit, and getting bread out of bread machine pans is always a bit challenging since you can't simply lift it out with parchment paper like you can a traditional loaf pan. But to loosen it, I ran a spatula around the edges of the loaf and it came out surprisingly easily. The paddle, however, was still stuck inside the bread. I went ahead and placed both loaves on the cutting board so that they could start cooling, and before they cooled completely, I wanted to remove the paddle. I used the dough hook that comes with the KBS bread machine, and it actually worked pretty well for this. I gently pressed down around the paddle to keep the bread from tearing, and then carefully worked it out as smoothly as possible. I do think I was able to remove it without causing too much damage to the loaf, although there's really no way around the fact that it's going to leave a hole where the paddle was. But as you can see, with a little bit of patience and taking my time, I was eventually able to get the hook out with minimal damage to the loaf. Okay, so here we go. These are the two breads. This particular one was baked in the oven. This one was baked in the bread machine. They both are pretty flat, if I'm being totally honest. However, I'm not gonna say that the one in the oven rose a lot more than the one in the bread machine. The one in the oven is more brown. So we're gonna cut in and just see what the inside looks like in these. Okay, so here's the inside of the one that was cooked in the oven. And then here is the one that was cooked inside of the bread machine. I do think the bread machine looks more dense just looking at the inside of it. It just doesn't feel like it had, like, I guess the same rise. I don't think either really rose. But most importantly, how do they taste? It's not bad. This is the one that was in the bread machine. I think it could have cooked a little bit longer. I actually think that it probably wouldn't be so dense if it had cooked a little bit longer. So you may do the cake cycle and then add like maybe 10 more minutes bake time. But it doesn't taste terrible. It's definitely almond flour bread. Like this is not like a white bread. It has more of like a whole wheat taste to it. I don't know, almond flour bread and almond flour things, I just think has like that. It's just denser. It is not as soft. Anyway, that was the bread machine. Let's taste it where we mixed it by hand and put it into the oven. And I will say, before I taste this, I almost feel like doing it in the oven was a little bit easier than the bread machine because I felt like I had to scrape down the sides. I had to set a timer to put in the vinegar, things like that. I don't know that it was really worth the effort to put it in the bread machine when really you just mixed it in a bowl and baked it in the oven. And it was a little bit faster in the oven. They taste very similar, to be honest. I feel like it almost has a butter taste to it. Maybe that's the fat from the almond flour. At the end of the day, I do think it was easier just mixing it and throwing it in the oven than having to worry about scraping down the sides and everything. My sister's off camera. I'm gonna let her taste it super quickly. She broke her foot.
I was about to say, what a time to be the taste tester.
So my sister thinks the oven version actually does taste better. So like I said, I thought it was easier. I couldn't tell a huge difference in the taste. She could. I'd say just do it the way the box tells you to do it. Don't even worry about a bread machine. So anyway, until next time, thanks. Bye.